Hi, everybody. Today we're going to practice doing some 3D type and a few texture effects inside Illustrator. So we're going to try to do something a little more interesting. So let me share my screen and we'll try it together. All right, here we go. All right, so what we have here is on the side a sample of kind of a mock vintage postcard. And you can see that we have some 3D type, some shadowing, and then some texture and some yellowing on the card. And so what we're going to do is kind of build that with this template here on the side. Now, just so you know, this template basically was designed with some triangular shapes and a repeated blue gradient pattern inside those shapes. So if you take a look at it, went ahead and did those pieces separately, and each one has its own gradient color applied to it. That's something that perhaps you could figure out on your own. But for this demonstration, we're going to focus on the lettering and the type, and we're going to use a variety of techniques to kind of build that up. So first thing we're going to do is work on the California lettering. Now, it's nice the way they have this kind of 3D style here and those alternate colors. And so I'll show you how to use the 3D effects to create that. So let's just go ahead and pick our type tool and start out by picking a color and a typeface. So I might as well start with a similar color to what you see here on the California. And I'm just going to pick an orange, a straight up orange from my, or a lighter yellowy orange from my swatch palette. And I'm going to click on my page here and just type in capital letters, California. Okay, here we go. So I made it a little bit larger. And for this, I don't have the exact typefaces that are in the sample, so I'm just going to kind of recreate this using what's easily available. So I'm going to use impact for this one. That should work for us. And again, I'm going to go ahead and enlarge it. So it's of a reasonable size. And then I'm going to go with that light orange color in there to fill it in. Now, at the same time, you can see here that every other letter is kind of a lighter color. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And I'm going to use kind of an off-white just from the gray swatches here on the swatch palette. So I'm going to select each letter and go ahead and give it a little off-white. Good. Now, a lot of times when working with type and other objects like this, especially inside Illustrator, it's a good idea to make copies of what you're working on so that you can go back to it later if you need to, because some of the alterations we're going to make are permanent. And so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this California word. So I'm going to hold Option or on the PC Alt and just drag it over to the side. So now I have a copy. And then I'm going to go ahead and modify and edit the original. One more thing we're going to do to this lettering before we apply the 3D effect is notice how in the sample there's like a pink color around the edges of the words. We can mimic that fairly easily using a stroke line on our letters. So the last thing I'm going to do is to go ahead and add kind of a light pinkish color as a stroke color. All right, so in this case, what we've got here is I'm going to go ahead and use my color palette here and just click that little eyedropper and add kind of a pinkish color as the stroke color. All right, if you don't see that, go ahead and use your window menu and expand the color palette, or you could use the swatches and just pick up a pink color, but you want to adjust it so it's kind of light. It's not really so dark. So here I could maybe even adjust the slider on the color palette. You can barely see it on here, but you'll see it later when we make the 3D effect. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and drag this down, kind of put it in place. So now we're ready to do the 3D effect. So under the effect menu, what you're going to look for is 3D, extrude, and bevel. So what extrude does is it stretches any object. So it gives it dimension. I'm going to click on that. And you're going to see here that right off the bat, it went ahead and turned it and stretched it a little bit by default. Looks like in this window, it tells me the extrude depth is 50 points, and it stretched it about the size that I actually need for this. So that looks pretty good. But the only problem is it's pointed, the stretch or the perspective is from above, when actually in this thing, I need it from below. So that's what this little cube selector is. You can, by hand, drag that cube with your mouse and tilt it so that it's from below or from the side. You can just kind of control it like that and alternate which direction you want it to go just by dragging slightly with your mouse. That's good. And that gives it kind of that, that stretch. All right. You know what we didn't do is we didn't apply the curve to this lettering. I probably should have done that first. So I'm going to hit cancel. And it's going to go back to normal. So it's a little easier to add the curve to these letters before it is to add the 3D effect. So let's pause on that. We're going to go back and add the curve, then go back and add the 3D effect. Same menu as before. Under the effect menu, we're going to look for warp. And the warp we're looking for is arch. So under the effect menu, there's warp, and then there's arch. And what it's going to do is give us a slight curve on those letters, which is going to look really nice with our perspective. Now, granted, right there, the preview here shows a much more dramatic curve. That's controlled by this bend here, this 50% bend. I'm going to change that number to something a little more slight, like 15%, and see how that changes the effect. That may even be too much, so maybe something more like 10. There we go. That's probably a little better. So now you can kind of see a little bit of that curve. I should have done that first. Now I've gone ahead and added it there. Now we're ready to do the 3D effect. So under the effect menu, we're going to go to 3D and we're going to go extrude. Okay, so now we're kind of back to where we were. And here again, I can adjust this cube by dragging with my cursor. And I'm just going to drag it upward. And if I grab a corner and tilt it or turn it, that's how I adjust the direction of the perspective. And I'm just looking at the sample here, giving it a little bit of a curve. We don't have exact numbers to work with on this, so we're just kind of making it up. Good. All right. Now, also notice how there is kind of a black outline, and then there is, the colored image underneath. What that's basically showing you is that there is a preview, an outline version, and they're kind of overlapping each other. Also, these effects are not permanent. So when you apply them to an object, they look like they are applied to the object, but they can be adjusted. So there's a proper way to adjust these things. So let's say you go back and you realize, hey, I'm going to tweak it a little bit. I need to show you where to adjust it because there's a problem with the way you use the 3D effect. And what you don't want to do is duplicate your 3D effect. Instead, you want to edit or modify it. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm satisfied with the position here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. That closes that dialog box. And now I see the California there wrapped on the page. What I was talking about is if I now want to go back in and adjust that object, I don't want to go back to the effect menu and click 3D extrude. That would actually double the 3D effect. Instead, I need to use something called the appearance palette. So under the window menu is the appearance palette. The appearance palette stores every attribute you've applied to an object. So here you go. If I click on that appearance palette, you'll see that it actually lists here the 3D effect, the 3D extrude and bevel, because that object is selected. So if I click it here, it will return me to that dialog box and exactly where I left off, adjusting the object. Now, you'll notice that there is a slight taper where the left-hand side of the California on the sample is a little bit taller than the A on the other side. That is an additional amount of perspective that can be applied to the object. So let's turn this dial up a little bit and see if we can do the same thing. Let's see what happens. There we go. That's more like it. See how I increased the perspective up to 58 degrees and how it has a little more of that turn and tilt to it? That's exactly what I want. So now I'm going to click OK. Perfect. Now I just kind of drag that around and position it where I want it. Good. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and apply that shadowy shape underneath the object. And notice how it's not a fuzzy or a light shadow. It's actually more of a shape shadow that is kind of a duplicate of the shape of the object. We can recreate that by coloring the object itself. So what I'm going to do is actually make a copy of this California block and then color it like a shadow and position it underneath the word California. Before I do that, however, I can still adjust color if I want to. So see how this color on my sample is a little more purple than pinkish, bright pink like the sample? Well, I can go ahead and still alter the color, any of those attributes on that object, and it's going to update the object in frame. So I just need to adjust until I get the preferred color I want. Let's see if I can get that more fluorescent pink a little bit, see if it picks it up a little better. Don't want to worry about fiddling with this too much, but again, just know that you can adjust these colors and the object will update as needed. All right, I'm just going to take a stab at this and then let it go. Okay, so I'm going to leave that as is for now and move on to the next step, making the shadow. Okay, so to make a duplicate of this, again, I use the duplicate shortcut. So I'm going to hold Option or Alt and just kind of drag that object and then let go of my mouse and it makes a copy. Now notice how it is right above the object. It's there in place. And I still have the original here underneath. For me to get that shadowy effect, what I need to do first is change the color of that under layered California to gray. And then I'm going to show you how to blend that gray with the background so it looks semi-transparent. So on the stroke color, I'm going to pick kind of a medium gray color. And then on the fill color, I'm going to do that same medium gray. So now that word California is kind of a solid gray. Next, what I need to do is adjust the opacity, the blending mode of the object. And that's done using the transparency palette. So under the window menu, we can look for transparency. And then this transparency palette gives you similar blending modes to what you find in Photoshop. So for example, right now, that object is still selected, the gray object, and it's set to normal. Watch what happens when I change this to multiply. That gray object now fades with the object underneath, and that gray blends with that blue underneath and it looks semi-transparent, kind of like that shadow on the side. It's a little too bold, so maybe what I'll do is go ahead and lighten that opacity a little bit. Yeah, somewhere around, 65% looks pretty good. All right. Now it's just a matter of clicking on the top California object and nudging it down so it's a little bit closer and lines up with um, the shadowy shape. Good. And so now you can kind of see that object sitting there in the extra shadow above. And I nudged it with my keyboard just to kind of slide it into place. Now, again, I can continue fiddling with this a little bit. I can even rotate it if I want, just to get it to line up just a little bit better. It is a little bit frustrating because the boundary of the object is different than the appearance of the object. And that's a little bit frustrating whenever you're using one of these effects, is that it doesn't, again, permanently alter the object, it just alters the appearance. So when you actually select it and operate it, under the hood, the outline and the selected object still appears in the normal format. That's why when you drag the California, you see the block California letters. They're not tapered or adjusted in the 3D mode like the effect is. Kind of a weird problem in Illustrator, but that's what it does. Okay, I fiddled with the California enough. I want to move on to the next area. Specifically, I want to focus on the USA down in the corner. And you can see how that USA isn't actually three-dimensional. It doesn't have kind of side edges, but it has kind of a cast shadow behind it. So to recreate that, to mimic that, again, I don't have the exact typeface, but what I'm going to do is just type out the block letter USA. And then I'm going to go ahead and scale it a little bit. So it's a little bit larger. And actually, the sample image, the font is a little more aired out. So there's a little more wider kerning on it. So I'm going to go ahead and using the character palette, I'm going to go ahead and increase that leading or that kerning quite a bit. 100, 150 is good enough. All right, next thing I'm going to do is color it. So it has the same color. And I'm going to go ahead and just use my eyedropper this time and select the red color from the sample image. Now notice how that USA on the sample has a stroke on it. I can go ahead and mimic that as well. On my type, I can select the stroke color and probably that light gray again that I used on the California letters. I'm going to increase the stroke so it's a little more visible. Something like that is probably better. Okay, so now you can kind of see there is a slight tilt. There's a slight adjustment to those letters. But before I make that, perspective adjustment, I'm going to make the shadow adjustment. And you'll see why in a minute, why I want to kind of do one step at a time. The logic here is that it's easier to adjust the shadow and the tilt of the letters before I get into perspective. So I'm separating those two steps. So I'm going to make the cast shadow by, again, making a duplicate of these letters. I'm going to go ahead and hold Option Alt, to drag and make a copy. And then I'm going to use that same technique that I used on the California shadow. I'm going to select kind of a medium gray. For the USA. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the transparency palette to adjust that to be multiply. And then I think if I remember right, the opacity is set to like 65%. Good. Now I need to tilt those letters, give it kind of that turn so it looks like it's a cast shadow. All right, here's the trick to that. There is a free transform tool that allows you to do kind of perspective tilts and turns. And in this case, I'm going to click on the tool and make sure that it is on free transform. Notice how you have these little adjustment circles on the corners of that USA object. If I move my cursor, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. If I move my cursor to the middle and I just tilt and tug and drag down, notice how it now stretches those letters so that they go in a cast shadow style backward. And I can keep doing that from the middle. That's good. Next, I can go back to my normal selection tool and drag that USA into place. And you can kind of see now how the USA overlaps that shadow. Good. Next, all I need to do is grab those two objects and tilt them a little bit. And that's going to give them a little bit of that perspective that the sample shows. Now I can continue if I want to adjust these. I can even adjust the front object. If I click on the front USA and I go back to that free transform tool, I find it easy, just click in the middle and I can tilt and turn and kind of stand those letters up a little bit more. So when it comes to using the free transform tool, minor adjustments are better. You don't want to go for really wide adjustments. You can really kind of tweak your letters too much if you do it too far. I think that's far enough on those. Good. So now I kind of have that letter kind of standing up. Now, the last thing we could do here is this greetings from. So you might have guessed how to do that. I can go ahead and just click up here at the top, type greetings from, and notice it inherited the spaced out kerning I had before. I'm going to go back and fix that down to 0. And then what I'm looking for is kind of a script font. And again, we may not all have the same fonts. So I'm just going to look for one in here that I like. I kind of like that Victor script. And in this case, it's a little bit too big, so I'll shrink it down just a hair. And notice how the greetings has a solid red and an extra shadow underneath it. We can create that, again, using kind of a red fill on it, and then adding a stroke. Now here's something you might want to check on your stroke setting. Notice how if I add that stroke, that black stroke to it, let me zoom in on it, you'll see, oh, there's the gray. All right. Notice how that gray stroke, it kind of overlaps the inside of that red, not what I want. I want the stroke to be on the outside of the letters. Make sure that you click on the stroke setting and you set the stroke to align to the outside of the object. And that'll move that stroke line outward, or at least it would have, but it didn't. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to have to outline the font before that stroke will move for us. So what I'm going to do is click on the two words with my selection tool, and I need to go to the type menu and I need to do create outlines. What does create outlines do? Create outlines converts any text object into an actual vector object. In this case, I just want the word greetings and from, and I want to have that stroke so I can control the stroke. So what I have to do here is I need to ungroup them. And then I need to make sure that I select just the red greetings word. And notice again how that stroke is kind of overlapping. Now that I've converted greetings into an outline, into a shape, the stroke should behave now. It should align to the outside. There, that's what I was going for. All right, so now you can see how that stroke moved for me to the outside of the letters. Wouldn't do that before because actually there is a limitation when you're in font view, it won't do it. Why? I don't know. Okay. Now let's kind of speed up and do the last little bit here. We want to add kind of that yellowing effect and the texture that we want to make this look like it has a little bit of vintage texture. So first thing is that yellowing effect. Very simple. All I need to do is draw a rectangle shape, and I'm going to put that rectangle over the top of everything. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that rectangle there and put it in place. Next, I'm going to go for kind of a yellowy fill color on that thing. So I'm going to turn off the stroke on that rectangle, and I'm going to click on the fill box, and I'm going to go for kind of a light yellowy brownish color. There we go. And so now it's above everything, right? So what I need to do is then do a blending mode on this. Just like I used the blending mode on the shadows, I can use a blending mode on this tan object over all of those type objects. That's again found in the transparency palette. And this time I can try two. Multiply might work. Let's see what multiply does. That looks pretty good. I could also try overlay. Nah, that didn't work. So sometimes it's just a matter of experimenting with what different blending modes are available to get the desired effect. In this case, I do think multiply is the best one because it's going to blend all those colors and kind of bring them together. Now, the last thing I need is that texture. I need that broken texture on top of the object. So here you can tell that yellow object is above everything. That's why everything is yellowing. To get that texture, I could use maybe an art brush, a vector brush, and like paint some of that texture in. Or in this case, what I've already done is I've prepared a transparent PNG image of texture that is just white bits plastered over a blank transparent layer that'll come in and add texture to the object. So basically, in a nutshell, if I go to the File menu and I go Place, I'm going to go find and locate that texture file. And so for here, I'm going to go to, see my computer. Go to the right folder. And what I have here is a white texture PNG that's a transparent object. Place it, and I'm going to bring it into the file. Boom. Now it so happens that this texture file is not sized correctly to that document. So I need to actually scale it down. So I'm going to scale it down to the right size. Now you see how it kind of shows up over the object itself. So this is working because the, again, the Photoshop file is white texture on a transparent background, and the file itself was saved as a PNG file, which makes it possible to store that transparency so that those painted texture lines come through and will now show up over the top of my vector art. You may have noticed here in this situation, because I applied the white texture on top of everything else, it's also applying that white texture on top of the yellowing effect that I have in the document. I actually want the texture to appear yellow as well. So what do? I need to put this image beneath that yellow faded object. So the keyboard shortcut for this is Command and left bracket, and that will put it down one layer underneath that rectangle. If that didn't work for you, then if you're on a PC, it's going to be Control and left bracket. Left and right bracket, bring your objects forward or backward in space. All right, so there you have it. Now we have our little vintage object with a Photoshop texture plus a little 3D effect and some other lettering and perspective effects applied. So what do you do with that? You do this or whatever else you feel like doing. This is one of those situations where a combination of techniques create the desired effect. So have fun with it. All right, everybody. Hopefully that was informative. See you next time.